Welcome, welcome, everyone. So great to have you with us, and welcome to Association Rockstars. We hear about some of the amazing work of association executives, partners, colleagues that are building the industry of tomorrow. I'm your host, Lowell Aplebaum, CEO of Vista Cova. We partner with organizations on strategy and governance. It's my honor and pleasure to have two of my favorite people in the world with me today for our conversation. Mills Clement is the CEO of the Chicago Association of REALTORS. She's currently the chair of the board of Association Forum. She's also a fellow of ASAE. Under her leadership in 2018, Chicago Association of Realtors issued an apology for past actions in promoting inequality and segregation in Chicago. She's been a vocal advocate for DEI, penning an op-ed for Chicago Tribune on the importance of ending segregation in real estate and issuing an industry call for action seeking more equity for Black realtors and fair and equal treatment for Black and minority property owners. Steven Stout, also a fellow of ASAE, also CAE, is the executive director of the Texas Society of Association Executives. Steven spent more than 20 years in association management. He's been recognized nationally for his leadership and contributions, including being named as an ASA fellow. He's the co-host of Better by Association podcast, another great one to check out. Both of them are previous. We've had conversations here before, thought leaders in the industry. And for today's topic that we wanted to talk about, two people that could not be happier to have at the table. Culture is something that many people talk about in many different ways. You know, those behaviors, those expectations that we look to those that are participating in our organizations to display, to adhere to expect. And today, in particular, we're going to look at two aspects of it. Specifically looking at aspects of what does board culture look like, what does staff culture look like, a little bit of the intersect between the two. Maybe we'll go broader from there. But just to get us started, let's hear a little bit of both of your voices. I'd love to hear from each of you if you can recall a moment in your career when you realized the power or fragility of organizational culture, right? What happened in that moment? And by luck of the draw, we said Michelle would go first on this one.
Great. Thank you, Lowell. Thanks for having me, everybody. I do want to point out that me and Steven are in the same fellows class, undoubtedly the best class. I mean, let's just get that cleared before we begin. But I think culture became important for me from a staff perspective when I started at Chicago Realtors about 7 years ago. I came into a culture that was pretty established, and we were in a phase where there were going to be some changes happening. Not just within the staff, but also within the board. And then the realtor associations in general have a big culture. They are very unique in the association space. And so I wanted to come in and really try to shift the culture to an understanding of association management and not just realtor management, not just realtor association management. So that was going to require a shift in the mindset of the staff, and that meant a shift in the culture. Um, we knew that doing that work was going to take full buy-in. It was going to enhance, I think, not just the professional development and the way the staff would work and interact and ultimately respect each other, but it was going to take all of them working on it. So we ended up starting with a culture task force internally. We had members from each department, junior members from each department, which is what really made it important and really made that work stand tall. But I think that was my aha moment. I'm sure we'll get a little bit deeper into the how, but it was coming in and recognizing I was walking into a very defined culture and respecting that culture, but wanting to take us to a different level required a different level of understanding.
Excellent. Thank you. Stephen, how about you? A
Yeah.
moment.
Thanks for having me, Lowell. I really appreciate being here. Michelle, lovely always to be a panelist with you, my fellow. For me, as far as culture goes, I had a different experience. I came in 2016 and when TSC was going through a sort of a brand reinvention. So essentially, they wanted to blow up the culture and build it again. So I had more of a free opportunity to do what I wanted to do with the culture. There wasn't a level of expectation of like it wants it to be this. So I had more of a blank canvas, building a culture that I didn't have much to go off of before. And so that was, to me, that was very interesting because I was trying to figure out like culture is kind of this fictitious thing that we can't like tangibly touch, but it's really, really important. So no pressure coming on as the new ED and building a culture that everyone wants it to be awesome, amazing, connecting, and it's all led by me, which was that's how I sort of realized how important culture is and how fragile it can be. Like, you know, if I were to, like, I don't know, came on and then suddenly said, no, this is not for me, I'm leaving, then they have to start all over again. So that was my first sort of foray into, like, wow, I have to build this into some sort of image that people want to get behind and learn more about the organization itself before I can even start that process, right? And that's even after the interview process of getting the position, just learning about the org itself in a totally different level than it is learning about, like, you know, finances, staffing, yada yada, all that stuff. So that was my first, like, oh crap, this is very serious and this is very fragile, and it's up to me to help guide this conversation. So that was my first really big aha moment with culture.
You know, both of your statements make me think about that culture ultimately is the baseline of trust, right? I mean, that's where it feels like you build it, you earn it, and fragile, as you said a number of times, I could easily lose it.
Yeah.
That probably takes some good amount of partnership, which I'm hoping we hear about as we go along the way. Let's jump into perhaps board culture first, and then we'll go to staff culture. We could talk between the two. Steven, I'll start with you. I know a few years ago we were in a session, and your chair at the time, you started talking about framing and formalizing values to guide the board and their culture. Uh, Tell us a little bit about sort of the journey of that, but also what you've done with it since. How do you define or direct the culture of your board?
Yeah, so at the time, coming out of COVID, the board decided that they really wanted to focus on who we are as a board. Who are we? Different from the organization. We spent a lot of time during defining who TSCE is and what our vision is, what our core values are for TSE. But the board itself, what kind of board do we want to be? So part of a strategic planning retreat, we just spent a good chunk of time finalizing and identifying values for the board of directors. So these are values that we keep moving forward with every iteration of the board. And some of them were so, they seem like common sense, some of them. And we know there's one that's kind of my favorite. We have about 4, and I'll read them to you. It's engage authentically, land the plane, which is my absolute favorite. We were having that conversation. My board was like, I don't know how to say this in a formal way, but land the plane, make a decision. Or everyone was like, absolutely, just use that term. Don't formalize it. That's what we like. Govern with accountability and lead with foresight. So those are things that we put in front of them every time. A lot of people at meetings will say their vision, mission statement in front of the board. We put that as well as their values in front of them for every decision they make. So they know how we expect you to act. And it was a group effort creating them. It wasn't like one person saying that these are the values. They went through many iterations as far as wording. And then recently, we've only had them for a couple of years. And recently, we just came out of our summer board retreat, and now we incorporate it into the orientation. Like, this is the values of this board. This is how we see ourselves, and we expect you to act accordingly or in line with. When we first start talking about that space in the nominating committee process, because we want to make sure anyone who wants to serve knows this is the board that's expected. And we've had a lot of success with it. And what's great is bringing on new board members, people seem to attach very quickly to them. They identify with them. And that might play a little bit of role of us our members do exactly what we do. So they might know, they might have worked with boards that don't ever land the plane, and that's very frustrating to them. So they want to be a part of a board that does. So that might play a role into it. But I'm really proud of the board for, like, sticking with these and making sure that they're very important identifiers for future leaders as well.
Michelle, as you think about the work you've done with the boards you've had over the years, how do you approach the culture conversation with them?
Yeah, I always talk about starting at home first. So we actually started with the staff team first and did a little bit of a simultaneous buy-in. We use the same facilitator for the board and the staff for we call them advances versus a retreat. We like to move forward, not retreat backwards. But we ended up being very intentional about having the same message go to the staff that went to the board. And that really helped us identify what culture was going to look like and what culture we expected. And that kind of helped set those guidelines. So I think the key for us was working with a facilitator. And at the time, we used Chelsea Hayes with the Coaching Factory, who has extensive culture work and really knows how to get it from the personal perspective. So when we were going to these advances in the beginning, it wasn't to go build culture. It wasn't to build a strat plan. It was literally just to get to know each other and get to know each other on a personal level. And then as a result of that, when we're simultaneously within a day doing the same activity with the staff team, same process. Let's get to know each other as individuals and understand who the whole human is. That's when the values started coming out, and that's when the culture started coming out organically. So we didn't want to get to a place where we were up on a whiteboard writing down, here's our new culture and our new values. We wanted to start to just live it. And
Yeah.
since it was happening at the same time with both groups and the same messages were going through, organically, those same values started to rise. And I think that's what's helped us really center that conversation.
For either of you, let's have a few, whoever wants to answer. Uh, Board members, of course, we get new ones every cycle, right? And how do you balance new board members coming in with what their priorities and what their values are, and including them in this culture that's been defined, where it's something that they don't just sort of inherit and have to adhere to, but get to have say in or get to have ownership, right? Like, how do you continue to introduce, preserve, but evolve board culture?
If I can kind of build off my last answer, for us, it's that board advance. So the new members are coming in to the same program. We do it offsite, and that has been how they've been able to fall into the culture. So you can come in with your own agenda or your own expectations, and then once you get into that group, you quickly see it's not about you. It's about the full group. And it doesn't mean that those aren't priorities that we do or don't discuss. You just quickly learn, okay, this is a pretty tight-knit group, and they've put some time into getting to this place. So let me see how I fit into this puzzle. And I can still be my unique self. I can still be authentic. I can still have my priorities because we celebrate that. But I also have to make sure that I'm honoring and respecting, the individuals that are here and what is already built. So I think that it's a mandatory place. You know, you can't replace just human interaction in an informal environment.
Yeah.
And that has been how we've been able to maintain that.
Yeah, kind of speaking also to Michelle's point, like, getting them away from their work and their space and getting them into a space with just us and our leadership, that really is beneficial. I really always feel almost disappointed when someone can't make we call it retreat, the retreat, because they'll miss that hallway conversation, those breakfasts, those dinners. And what I appreciate is that the returning and outgoing board attend as well. And I've always been very impressed with how welcoming they make the new group feel. It is hard to walk into a room of people who seem to be tight knit, and suddenly we want your voice on everything we've ever done. But at the same time, I'm impressed with my board members' leadership, who's able to make sure that happens, that every voice gets heard. So I agree with Michelle that those like in between times, the social aspect, they're valuable too, not just the work piece, but being with each other, breaking bread with each other, all those things. It makes a difference.
I meant to dive into sort of the yum and the yuck of culture when it comes to the board. We'll probably do the same with staff, but for culture not to be something that people are scared about, or it's just something to avoid doing something wrong, you have to recognize when culture is being done in excellence, right? When people are living their values at places that they're actually models of culture. Like, and I'm just wondering if either of you, in the context of your board, are there any pieces in place that the board self-recognizes or you help them recognize? Like, how do they know when they're getting it right? Like, are there any demarcations that like look at this culture, like, and look at the ones that are championing it? Do you have anything you do to recognize excellence in culture at the board level?
At the board level, we don't have like an award system or anything like that. I have been, and this is a little bit of my hang up because I'm an athlete by nature. I grew up as an athlete, and I grew up with everybody's not a winner, being like, I don't want the participation trophy. So I'm not big on awards and recognition, even though I know that is a value for other people. I think what has been our marker is probably more so the success that we have in ourselves as an organization when we go through change. And if you followed the realtors at all, we are going through a lot of change, and we are your case study approach for that. And so I think while there's no trophy for us, I think the board has definitely been able to sit back and say, hey, we did a good job navigating through literal storm after storm after storm. Is that a storm coming? And we know what to do. We know how to execute. And we see that same on the staff side. There probably is room for me to improve on recognition, but I think that's really when I think it matters. When it's not easy, when it's really hard, when you have to have really hard conversations and you have to have a room and not agree in that room, but you come out with respect for each other, I think that's when you know you hit your mark.
Mm.
We have a very minuscule award system. We call it the board report card. So we have a board report card where we list certain things that we want the board to accomplish since the last meeting and quarterly, like if it talk about foresight works or talk about leading authentically into under the different core values they've identified, and we just give them that serotonin that you get when you see a little check in a box. That's their retreat. That's the reward. They'll see that on their sheet and they're like, oh, my column for Q3 has a lot of checks. I'm awesome. Or what on the other side, they'll be like, oh crap, I only have one check. I need to get my button gear for next quarter. So it's helped. It's like a healthy competition, but not, like Michelle said, we don't give a trophy or anything. It's just,
Sure.
it helps us sort of understand the engagement level of the board too as a whole, because we try to compile that at the end of the year and look at the engagement level of the board, not to shame anyone, not to say like Michelle didn't do this, Steven didn't do this. It's more like as a whole, this is where we are. And it helps us understand like what areas the board may be lacking as far as like moving forward, or areas they're advancing, and we should acknowledge and pat ourselves on the back for that.
I'll say one example that I've seen is a organization that about 2/3 of the way through the board cycle had all the board members silently submit which other board member, can't vote for yourself, sort of best embodies each value.
Oh, I love that.
And the board member that's like selected as that, it's not about getting an award or a trophy. They are asked in the onboarding of the new board members to train about that value, right? So the recognition is through actually teaching the next generation about it.
That's great.
I like both of those ideas, actually. We always say we're going to do that. I think we should start.
Let's talk about the other side of it. Inherently in bylaws, there are ways that which you can remove board members, but those are like extreme cases, right? And inherently, if we're talking about the culture of a board, that there's going to be moments, accidental or perhaps even intentional, where there's violations of the culture you're trying to, right? Stepping in the wrong pool, if you will. And we know that the culture you have is the one that you tolerate, not the one that you say that you have. And so, right? It's the group that says these are our values, but do you live them? No. And so I'm not sure how far you want to get into any narratives about it, but how do you approach accountability at the board level, right? Like into the values that you ascribe to what you say is important, and whether that's minor mistake infractions or whether that's something more significant, perhaps not the point of like kicking someone off the board. How do you approach accountability when it comes to board culture?
A few years ago, we did remove board members. It's actually, there were back-to-back years where we removed members because they were in violation of, not even a formalized policy, but things that we weren't going to tolerate anymore, in the form of harassment or, inappropriate comments and activity. And they were always very hard decisions to make, especially when individuals might have been popular or close or considered friends or colleagues to many that have worked with them. But to your point earlier about the value system, when there are values there, you want to uphold them, and they don't matter if they're just on a piece of paper and you don't, put them in action. But more importantly was the value around trust. And we started off saying that if you don't have trust, this culture is null and void. And so we had to say, the staff trust us, the members trust us to follow through. And regardless of who it is, we have to follow through. And that means to the extreme, sometimes removal, to the extreme, sometimes a reduction and whatever that looks like. And we made that choice and we made that decision. And it's not a simple one. And it's times where there's still remnants of it. But it sends a message of we mean what we say and we do what we say we're going to do. And this is where we are. The other side to that is it sends a firm message to others, like almost that F around and find out, try it. It's not going to work here anymore. It may have worked here before. We're good on that. And so this is the culture. You want to be here. These are the values you need to uphold. And these are the values that will get you kicked off. And hard conversations, and we've watched other people have a value posted and do nothing with it. We just can't do that or we lose everybody.
Yeah.
We haven't had to remove someone yet, knock on wood, but what I have found with our board is our board's very protective of their culture. When someone comes on and tries to perhaps not go against something like that, they call. When I'm about to sit up and say something, I get cut off because someone else has already done it. They're very protective of the group and the community they built there, and like Michelle said, the trust. There's a lot of trust amongst the group, and if anyone looks like they're starting to chip away at it, they get called to the mat, and not by me, which is fantastic, right? I don't have to do that, but I'm impressed at how many people sit up quickly when I see someone maybe nearing a violation, and how quickly they course correct in a polite and respectful manner. But and it's one of those things where like, gosh, this is what you read about in books that you hope happens. So I've always felt very fortunate. The board's very protective of their own culture, and they make sure people adhere to it. We haven't really had anyone or given the opportunity to violate them in serious depth. But yeah, I've always been impressed that the board is so protective of their own culture.
When you have a culture that really bonds the board together as a team, then hopefully it is something they want to preserve. We know one bad seed can
Yeah,
really.
like you said, well, it's very fragile. It just takes one little like gust of wind to change it completely, and they're very, very, very protective of it.
What do y'all think is the role that, I mean, the board, right, is an entity, the fiduciary body, and the CEO plays the role as a partner, but also an employee of, right? So the two of you sit in this really interesting seat. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and I'll ask again when we switch over to staff culture, but when we're talking about board culture, uh, how would you characterize the role of the CEO with board culture, right? Are you the facilitator? Are you a participant? Do you help shape it? Do you, right? Like, where do you find that you best fit to help strengthen and support it?
I see myself as a participator.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like I'm a part of that boardroom. I don't feel like a subordinate. I also don't feel like a dictator. I feel like I'm a part of a team. And I think that's kind of where my role comes in. There might be times when somebody wants to, like you just said, Stephen, like check someone else's, like if they're like, hey, you're kind of pushing the boundaries here, but people will maybe check in, but they'll go have the conversations themselves. So I think I might be a barometer check sometimes if there's areas for beyond a conversation when maybe it's, hey, we should probably get some training on this, or maybe we should have a conversation at this next meeting about this. That's maybe when I come in a little bit more, but outside of that, I really feel like I'm a part of that team as a one.
And to agree, Michelle, one of the things I've been very blessed with my leadership is they remind me every year during my review that you're a member of the board. You are not our admin. You are not our staff member to take notes and execute projects. You have an equal say, granted not a voting say, but you have a say at the table with everyone else. We want you to act like a board member. So with that, that gives me a lot of trust from them and a lot of courage to speak up when I feel something's going wrong as well. So like Michelle, I see myself as a participant and help shaping it. I'm part of that shaping process and not necessarily, I do like Michelle's analogy of barometer because I feel like we are. I get a lot of people after a meeting like, hey, Michelle said that. How did that make you feel? Because it made me feel like this. And I'm thinking about talking to her, but I want you to tell me if you felt the same way. So maybe that's the barometer role we play a little bit, but I love that they consider me one of them and not here, take the notes, here, do this project, come send it out when you're done. I'm part of the conversation, which I always value that.
Love that. The do you find that the culture of the board in any way infuses the rest of the governance of the organization? Like, are those values translated so like they influence your committees or your task forces? Like, is there an expectation that the culture of the board is actually the culture of leadership of your organization, or is it really just meant for your board?
I think it spans across, and I think that is viewed from on our side, the board and the staff. Because I mentioned kind of our simultaneous work there. So I think the rest of the committees and the rest of we're a local association, but we're pretty prominent nationally.
Chicago's a small little town.
Just tiny,
We're not just a
very tiny.
little big city in Illinois. But there's always this joke, and any of the team is on here, like they always say, there goes Chicago, here comes Chicago. Like every time we go to something, they're like, here they go. So I think our culture it comes through our board, our staff, our members, our volunteer leaders, our attendees at national meetings from CAR, Chicago. There is definitely this vibe of us, and it's not an arrogance, it's just this lens of togetherness that we have. And I think that is our culture for sure. And that has started to just come through across the board. I see it everywhere. I just see it at all levels.
And with two on the committees piece, Lowell, a lot of our board members serve as liaisons to our committees. So, and our committee members, we hold like an orientation for the committee leaders, and we talk about the board work and what they're doing to help guide the committee work. And a lot of times we do talk about the board values, and you can see it in those committees. Like we'll have a conversation, and someone will like, "Well, are we leading with foresight with this conversation?" You're like, "Oh, snap! They were listened in the orientation about like how we're going to move forward with this work here." So we do see it bleeding. I think it was unintentional. They were originally created as board values. That is the name of them. But other committees have started adopting them into their work, which is fantastic. They're all great, but that happened organically. I wouldn't say that we had a process to make that happen. It's just sort of taken off, if you will, luckily.
Yeah. All right. One last question. I'm watching the time. We'll switch over to talk about staff. I clearly, ideally, you have a sort of a pipeline of those coming up that someday will serve on your board that are not yet on the board. And as important as it is for them to understand if they aspire to be in board service, the roles and responsibilities they would have someday, I imagine it's just as important that those are not yet at board service understand the culture that they would be experiencing as well. Do you have any intentional or not intentional efforts that those that aren't on the board are still introduced to the board culture? Like, is it something you share with the community abroad, just within a nominations process? Like, how how do you utilize this place of definition of of not just the function, right, but the community that is the board? How do you share that with those that may be on the board someday?
I think I go back to that organic piece for us. Our board is they're out there. So the members see them. We hold the board advance, the staff advance. We also have a leadership advance. And that is where we bring in our chairs, our vice chairs, standing committee members, and then the board is there too. So this culture is across every layer. So it just comes out. We also have several incubators for leadership. So we have a leadership accelerator program and an elite mentoring program. And same thing, culture is embedded in there. We don't have like a sheet that we pass out to members. Staff does have one, but we just haven't done that. And it's just been somewhat intentionally of this is just who we are, and you roll into this and you feel that warmth and you tend to embody it too. And that's what we hope for because we celebrate diversity so much. It's not a layer of you have to come in here and you have to fall in line with a certain culture. Our culture is about inclusiveness. It's about embodying the full person. So you get to come in and be authentically you. And I think when you come in and you feel yourself celebrated being who you are, then naturally you fall into what is considered the culture here. And we just can continue to do that. We continue to be open books and we continue to be groups of people that just have conversations. And I'm fortunate that our members don't have any hesitancy in talking and sharing their opinions. And, that always just helps us be better.
Yeah. For us, Lowell, we do have a more formalized process. It is in our nomination process. We identify these values. If you're interested in being part of that group, these are the values that are part of that group and make up that group. So if you feel you can fall in line, that's great. We want you to be part of it. If this doesn't sound, if you don't like the touchy-feely stuff or don't like what we're representing, you don't have to serve, and that's fine. It also incorporates, it ends up being, we do nominating committee interviews as well for the board, and I've seen more and more questions over the past couple of years about the board values for those nominees. Show us an example of the time you led with foresight, or walk us through a time when you landed a plane. And it's part of their interview process, and for the nominating committee to get to know them a little better. And by the time they get to the board service level, they have heard these things hundreds almost of times, so they're not surprised when we talk about them. But it's helped us sort of cater to those individuals who've raised their hand to serve, and really get the right people in the right positions.
I love that.
I like that too.
All right, so let's change the audience a little bit. We also want to talk a little bit about staff culture as its own distinct as well. Michelle was able to sort of bear witness to you bringing forward an act of cultural recognition with your staff. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the intention behind that, or how you went about doing that. I just thought it was a very powerful moment.
Yeah, so I mentioned early on that we started culture work pretty soon after I got here. And the way we did it was identifying one staff member from each department. So it ended up being about 7 staff that were involved. They were not senior leadership. We kind of wanted to have this not a top-down approach, but more an all-inclusive approach. And this group met and they basically decided what they wanted it to be. I wasn't coming in saying we better have this in there and this. I wanted to see what they came up with, and they took it extremely seriously and really, had conversations with multiple people. It wasn't just that group. They talked to everyone that they could find to kind of identify what works here for you, what doesn't work here for you at CAR. And they came out with the core values that we have as a team: diversity, excellence, collaboration, leadership, advocate, and respect. And those are the values that they felt that we were already living by or needed to work on or could enhance. And those are the values that were going to help us at the end of the day be great staff team for our members, which is why we all were there. And from that, the next iteration, the next year for them was developing norms that went against those values. So for example, if we're talking about, respect, we value our people, the norm within that was, something as simple as we use calendars to communicate our availability. We reschedule meetings in a certain amount of time. Like, they broke it down very, very, very granular to make sure that there weren't any opportunities for a misinterpretation of what does it mean to respect your colleague? What does it mean to, collaborate? What does it mean for excellence? And so that really helped eliminate the questions, eliminate the gray area. It also helped have conversations that if you weren't hitting those norms, let's talk about why. And then again, at those staff advances, there was almost that check-in to see how are we doing on these norms. And I know Lowell has led staff advances for us where we've taken each norm, different groups of people would work within those norms to see how are we doing? Are we hitting the mark? Are we falling off? And sometimes we were. Sometimes we needed to reset. Sometimes we needed to get the norms back in front of us and not just rely on it being top of mind. We even looked at our onboarding process to make sure that when we're bringing in new staff team, they have these same expectations, these same values, and these same norms. And our culture committee, they're still in place. It's been about 70 years. So the chair rotates. So there's new leadership there, but they hold us accountable. They go back and say, how do we make sure that we're still hitting these norms? They have not changed. Those values have remained in place. The norms have remained in place because they think they're what we need. But there's still that check-in to see how can we do better at this, and when we need to reset, we do.
Steven, I know your staff size is different, but you also, like, you're in charge of a staff and you have new staff members come in. How do you handle that internally?
It's, we're only a staff of 6, so everybody's part of the culture conversation. You really can't be left out of it, even if we wanted to. One of the things that is so delicate, though, Lowell, as you say, is when we have turnover. Like outside of COVID, people moved around, of course. And so you have, for me, it's more about I have this amazing culture and I'm trying to protect it myself. And then, life happens, people leave and people come on. But I feel the pressure of the decision of bringing on that new person because, like we were talking about before, it takes such a small piece to for lack of better terms, ruin everything. And so I feel a lot of pressure when bringing on a new team member because I want to make sure that like not only can they do the job, but do they fit in with our culture here as a team? My team's incredibly innovative. They push the boundaries all the time, more so than I do. And someone that can't keep up with that could find that frustrating, or something where we're changing things all the time. That could be like, can't we just do it one way for more than a year, do something the same? So I make sure that again, there's only 6 of us. So for those final interviews, every member of the team is a part of those conversations. Whether you're the front desk or you're the meeting planner, you get to have a say and see these individuals present themselves in the conversation. What I really appreciate is I don't really police the questions the staff ask the candidate as much, legally, yes, but outside of that, no. And it's nice to see them sort of get to know them a little better, just asking questions about who they are, because that helps me understand what's important to this other staff, right? If you had a shot to ask 2 questions of an individual and they choose one of those to be like, tell me about yourself and what you do for fun or how do you relax, I'm kind of getting of how the vibe people are looking for each other. And I can tell pretty quick, in a staff of 6, it's really hard to hide that you're not meeting the culture or not able to line up with the rest of us. It's pretty quick to tell, but we've been fortunate. But I will tell you, every time someone leaves and I have to bring on a new person, that really stresses me out because I have to think like, I've got to protect what we got. It's so good. How do I make sure that whoever I bring on is able to sort of keep up and come along for the ride? I feel that more here than I did in my last job. So it's very important to me, and can be a challenge, especially with a small staff, because like I said, just one bad egg can make it go south real fast.
I'll add though, if you have that bad egg and anybody listening, don't be afraid to move that egg along,
Yep.
because it can disrupt, to your point, and it can really tear down what you've built.
Right.
So I've learned over time, it's just better to just get them on out of there.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Right? You have someone who's technically doing their job, right? But is not exactly aligning to the values or the culture of the staff.
Mhm.
How do you approach that conversation? Like, how do you like it? It's a lot easier to say you were supposed to finish this deadline by this date, you didn't do so, right? Like, it's easier to point at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you approach this piece of it?
I mean, Illinois is an at-will state, so we're fortunate that we've got a little bit more flexibility to cite culture, or fit as a reason if we need to, or no reason. But I think we have very transparent conversations. That is one of the norms. Is we are transparent, and we say, hey, you're doing great in this and this and this. However, how you are communicating is not hitting here, or how you are, maybe lying, whatever the case is, it's not hitting what our expectations are. And sometimes there's something going on, which is why you have these conversations. Maybe there's something going on that you're bringing in personally that's translating into this. And so when you have that conversation, the person might think like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize it. Or, hey, you know what? This is what's happening for me. So right now I need to just focus on work. That's not a subject for, termination at all. And we like to know that. So that's definitely occur. I've seen people turn things around. We don't do performance evaluations. We do quarterly check-ins. And this allows us to have conversation on a regular basis. So if there are times that they're seeing like something like, I don't know if this is a fit, you can have that conversation. There are other times when you just know it's just not a fit. It is just not a fit. Like if you talk about trust, if you don't trust the person, it's not a fit. They don't trust you, maybe it's not a fit. And we try to have those conversations as best that we can to see where we can work. But if not, sometimes it's better for both parties to go. We are very kind, I think, when we do have to make the hard choice. We try to always offer some type of out service, and we try to be supportive because it's not an easy thing to do for either side. But The other piece to that is you have to protect that culture, and
Yeah.
it can just disrupt so much so quickly. The fun part though is, and I don't know if it's fun, but afterwards you tend to learn more than you did at the time. And you usually, even though it feels hard in the moment, you see the benefit afterwards when the culture kind of speaks up and says, hey, now I feel this, or I was, holding back on this, and you see them flourish again. So that's always, reassuring.
Yeah, I mean, what Michelle said is spot on. You see these individuals, like you said, Lowell, they meet expectations, they do the work. Luckily Texas is also in an at-will state, so we have a little more flexibility. But at the same time, we do talk quite a bit on expectation amongst the team, because again, and I imagine it translates to large and very large. But if you aren't connecting with the staff or connecting with the culture, it's very obvious, and projects do get left behind. They might meet a deadline, but they'll have a meeting where they'll say like, I'm not getting a lot of creative answers out of this person. Like you want to, it just seems status quo, and that's not who we are. We've identified we want to be innovative, we want to push, and we need someone who's willing to go there with us. So, like Michelle said, we have those conversations pretty quick. I will say, early on, I was more like, give it a chance. We'll see if it'll work. And then now I'm like, nope, cut in the bud right now.
Same.
So I have learned to go through the process of this, that you need to pay attention very quickly. You can't let it grow and get worse, or in hope that there's a change. But like Michelle said, sometimes people make a change and it works for the better, which is great. But staying on top of it is really important, and taking action quickly. Otherwise, you lose the good thing that you got.
I've also read that, well, I've experienced sometimes someone is more of a culture fit than they are a skill fit.
Mhm.
And so you kind of got to decide, are you willing, or whoever is the staff person responsible, to put in the time to coach that individual or put in the resources for professional development? But then you also then have to see at what point is it going to work or not? So
Yeah.
sometimes you hire for culture and not skill, and that can bite you. Sometimes you hire for skill and not culture. That can bite you. Kelly McDonald, who is a marketing and DEI expert, just spoke at our DEI summit and shared that there's a stat out there that employees will give up about $8,000 in salary for a culture fit
Mhm.
over a salary increase. And so we know that this is important. We know the culture that we provide is important. So as you bring individuals in, it's just as important for us to make sure that they fit, and then for them to see if they're a fit too.
Yeah. I'm drawing back, Michelle, to your frame of like incubators for leadership. I want to talk about it through a staff lens. There's one thing about living a culture, and there's a different responsibility or skill set, perhaps even, that comes with leading a culture. And as you think about sort of empowering the staff that work for you, whether it's small staff, Stephen, right, or your staff size, Michelle, what do you see as any places where you can help train them to be a better leader when it comes to culture and not just living it?
I think you lead by example. I'm pretty authentic, and I could be pretty vulnerable with the staff team. I try to bring my full self here. I have no choice. I'm here all the time. So it's like, you're going to see me or not. And I encourage that back. And I think I've seen that kind of get mirrored back, where individuals can be who they are. And I think that helps. The other side to that is, exploring, what does professional development look like? What do those transparent conversations look like? But also that staff advance that I mentioned that we do, that's their time to come in and see the importance of culture. We are not in there building a strat plan. We're not in there developing, the next product or service. We're in there hearing about who their mentor is. We're in there hearing about, what artifact at home speaks to them. Shout out to Lowell and those prompts, for the team. But that's what I think puts the leadership of culture in front of them. And I've seen some of them do many advances with their own staff teams. Like, that's not a requirement. I've learned about it after the fact. So that kind of
Mm,
tells us that they see some value in it. We recently just did a mini advance for our managers team. They were seeking more, and it was an opportunity to, okay, let's do a mini advance and bring in some training that you're looking for. And I think it's ever changing, figuring out how to do it, but also equipping people that haven't necessarily had to have a culture or a fit conversation with talking points and tools, of course, but more so just understanding the importance of just showing up and being who you are.
Love that.
And yeah, and with it too, like Michelle hit the nail on the head, the professional development piece. You know, I'm not naive enough to think all my staff are going to retire from TSC at some point. I often go to them and like, how can I help you move forward in what you want to do? Do you want to do more meetings? Okay, let's put you in the meeting, more about meetings. Do you want to do more governance, like work with the board? Let's have you in those meetings more. I want them to feel like their time here is beneficial to them to grow as a professional. And I've lost, I will say, I might have shot myself in the foot. I've lost a few to my members because our members do what I do and they see the amazing work the staff does and I hire them away. But at the same time, like I'm super proud of them for growing up and moving on. It's just, it's a feeling that I cherish actually. You know, jokingly, I had a staff member who came to us very young and got snatched up by a member, which super happy for her. And we still stay in contact to this day about meeting up with like, how is she doing? Where does she want to go? How can I still help her get there in my role? And the funniest thing I ever heard is she's like, you know, I would murder for you. And I was like, well, that's very that's intense, but I love the passion and I love the attachment. But she and I worked together, you know, just out of college.
That's not one of your values.
Not one of
just to
her
be clear.
values. Please don't kill for us. But at the same time, the fact that she feels comfortable saying that to me, and then also just watching her grow up in the space has been like the best reward ever. And
Wow.
my staff as well, my other staff, I value when they want to learn something new or push themselves to do something new. Anything I can do to support as best I can, and I think that helps build a culture of trust and a culture of belonging because they feel valued and seen here, and that's very important to me.
You know, both of you have
Yeah.
referenced. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry, can we insert the disclaimer that Steven does not condone
Yeah,
murder?
please don't condone murder. Please don't murder anyone on my behalf.
All right, I just want to make sure I cover my guy.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fellows taking care of each other. All right. You know, you both talk about like when someone's not a fit, not holding it on for long. Tip gave us a great comment in the chat that hiring is the most important thing we do as leaders, right? Finding that person who's a fit plus. They're a fit. They also bring something unique and beneficial to the team is key. You both referenced little pieces of the hiring, but certainly before you have to get rid of them, making sure who you're bringing in, right? Just wondering, just from your own, as you've grown yourself as a CEO, as a leader, any reflections on that sort of hiring candidate process that you would have that is helpful for others listening to hopefully you don't get to the point they weren't a fit as you hired them?
Yeah, most recently, and I mean like the last few months, I've kind of changed my approach to hiring. And so we have external HR, but then we also recently started working with another consultant group that did a job task analysis with our entire staff team. And what that did was it opened their eyes to, yes, the tasks that the staff do, but then also our culture very quickly. And I did not know that they also did job searches, but we kind of just had a conversation, turned out that they did, and they ended up hiring for an executive office coordinator for us. It was the smoothest process I have ever been a part of in hiring. It's Victoria Gillespie Consulting, because they knew us. And we didn't have this year-long conversation or interactions. I'm talking within a few months, they were able to pick up who we were, probably in actually one session. But then they went out and they found someone for fit and skill, and they brought in the candidates that hit those marks only. So you're not stuck meeting someone that you really like, and only if you're not even seeing them, and that helped it. But the other part is they wanted to understand what our goals were in hiring. I'm a big coacher, talk about that athletic stuff, and I love to coach people, but I was able to say to them transparently, you know, in this next hire, I don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to coach. So I need someone that can come in and do this, hit the ground running. And guess what? I'm not even going to be here for the next 3 weeks. So I need someone that can handle that. And they're like, okay, cool, got it. And then they went and got it. And so now what I'm going to do, and I even with our recent hire of our chief operating officer, same thing. I knew what my goal was for the position before we even started. I shared that, and then they brought that. I am probably going to use some type of a search recruiter for every single position, if whether it's the maintenance team or what, because they were able to hit the need, save us time, and give us a person that can just literally plug and play into this culture. And that I cannot replace. There's just
Yeah,
no cost on that. That isn't as valuable as it is.
that's awesome.
Speaking as far as advice goes, Lowell, I would say trust your gut. I know that sounds so cliche, but the like few times I didn't and I went a little bit against my gut, it bit me on the hand, you know. So I've since then, like if someone told me like if it feels funny, it's funny. Like it is, acknowledge that it's funny. And something if something's making you feel that way, trust your gut. And that's really guided me well. I will say the few times I decided to go against it, I had to make a change. And I was like, if I had just at the beginning just gone with what I was feeling. But
Yeah,
also, you know, sometimes it depends on the time of year you're hiring and things of that nature. You know, sometimes it's an employer's market, sometimes an employee market, and all those things play a factor. But as best you can, trust your gut. You know your people more than you think you do. You know your culture, especially as a leader. You know what your board expects, all those things. So, yeah, trust your gut.
I love that. Well, time always flies by on these conversations, and I have like 20 more questions I could ask, but knowing people have tuned in because of the excellence and leadership that both of you bring, I'd like to sort of just end with a final piece of reflective advice from each of you, that for someone listening in, or if you were speaking to your younger self 10, 15 years ago, right? When it comes to building board culture, staff culture, what is that direction? What is that place that you would say is critical to reflect on as someone who leads culture that's critical to the success of an organization? And I know, Michelle, I know I had you kick off first. So Stephen, I'll have you kick off the
Yeah,
conclusion.
I think my advice would speak to everyone's imposter syndrome. You know, your voice is just as important at the table as everybody else's. And whether at the board level or the even the staff leadership level, what you think is also important. You know, I know so many leaders that want to be liked by their team that maybe they forego what they feel and do what the team feels. Trust me when I say, especially in a small team, you matter too. And on the board level as well, like they see you as peers. It's your time to shine. And it's hard to, I feel like in association space, we have a hard time tooting our own horn. Sometimes we're kind of trained to be humble. But I think it's important that you speak up when you have successes and make sure you're seen when those things happen because your voice is just as important as anyone else's.
For me, when I started to think about culture change, I started envisioning what Michelle as a coordinator wanted when I was working at a various association. And then what did Michelle as a manager want? And what did Michelle as a senior manager want? Like, what did I want in all these different phases of my career that I either didn't get or I got and I didn't understand it or I was upset about, or the things that I loved. And that's kind of what I think I brought to the table. Like, I remember not understanding the full scope of the organization, but I was only tasked with this thing, and that changed how I worked within the organization. So now, as a CEO, I want to help that coordinator, Michelle, and that manager, Michelle, and that specialist, Michelle, understand the full scope if that's what they want. So I think what I would say is just think back to what you would want at every stage of a career. If you are in a leadership role that can influence the culture, if you are not at that level that's influencing the culture from the top or the decision maker, voice what you want at your current role and
Yeah,
don't be afraid to share that. I mean, sharing that has helped me get to where I am. It's helped open doors, it's helped create new opportunities. So don't be afraid to vocalize that. I've also mentioned a lot of consultants here today, and I mentioned them because they have been key partners in this building process. And the other part to that is use the experts in the space. You know what I mean? There is someone out there for every budget that can help make it happen. But also, that outside voice, I have found really creates a non-biased opinion. It creates someone that's able to look on the outside and in And it brings in that level of trust for some people that might be skeptical, like, what's this person's deal? There's someone that's kind of fresh coming in. So I also think you should find great partners out there. And we have so many, and we switch them up. We bring them in for different things, but that makes this work even easier to do because the onus isn't all on you, and you've got someone else that's usually vested just as much to see the success that you bring.
Perfect. Thank you both for the wisdom. I'm going to add a bonus question we got in the chat at the end, and then I'll say thank you. We heard some examples, Michelle, of your advances, your mini advance. Any place if someone is thinking about sort of starting an intentional building of culture building for their managers and directors, like you're right, you're not 10 steps in. You're like, where do you start that journey in terms of bringing the staff along with that?
ChatGPT. I'm dead serious. If you don't even know what you're doing, you haven't even thought about it, you haven't even go into ChatGPT and say, how do I build a culture for my staff of 10? I've done no work in this space. You're an expert on culture building. Not to take, away the work of anybody else, but if you are starting fresh, what prompt questions can you give me to work with a staff team at our next staff meeting to talk about culture? Literally, I want to hold a 1-hour session. What can I do? Use these tools that are out there and get the conversation rolling. And then once you get a little bit of a firmer grip on what you want to do, that's when you can start bringing in outside people. We didn't have ChatGPT when I did the first iteration of this, but best believe if we did, we would have used it and kind of moved maybe faster. But start the conversation, just have the conversation, carve out some time. We used to do something called Culture Clash during our staff meetings. Just carve out 15-20 minutes and ask whatever prompts ChatGPT gives you on culture to your team.
And continuing that, for your directors, your board, have the conversation with your chair. Like, what would our board look like if we had board values? Do you think that's a worthwhile exercise for our board to go through to figure what those are? I'll tell you, you'd be surprised. It all stemmed from a conversation for me over sodas. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we had board values? And we were at a time where we were trying to get out of operations because of COVID. All boards were sort of operational during COVID, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and staffing levels. But making that shift from operational back to a strategic board, the values helped us get there. So it just started with a conversation with my chair about his interest and my interest in doing something like this, and then brought in the executive committee, and then it just caught on like wildfire. So have, like Michelle said, have the conversation, see where it goes.
Good. Hour flies by. I want to thank you both for a rich, meaningful, and deep conversation about two critical components of culture that are part and parcel of every single one of our organizations. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and signing in and contributing in the chat as well. Culture is something that we build together, and so it's wonderful to have you as part of the Association Rockstars community. Wishing everyone a wonderful summer ahead. Look forward to being together again soon. Thank you. Until next time, Association Rock On.